Voting strictly on your faith and not the constitutional compass means that you are putting something supreme to the Constitution. If the Constitution is supreme, then not even religion can be above that. That's why we have a separation of church and state. What makes you think that that doesn't apply to us as voters? Who do you think this is referring to in the preamble when it says we the people of the United States, blah, blah, blah? It means us. Not only is the Constitution a governance social contract where the government has to abide by these principles and provisions, but also US citizens. Now, I understand that we've been intellectually disenfranchised, so we haven't been told that we have to align our political decision making to the Constitution, but even the Citizens Almanac, which is a publication published by the United States government, tells us that we exist as individuals initially to be guardians of the United States Constitution. This means that when a disqualified candidate is positioned in front of us, we have to vote contrary to that because Amendment 14, Section 3 is above everything else. Why? It is an existential threat to vote in someone who is disqualified due to an insurrection. Now, there is evidence of the insurrection. There is evidence that he literally interfered in the 2021 procedure in order to certify the 2020 election results. And we don't require criminal prosecution. It is a political solution to a political crime. In fact, unconstitutional is much worse than illegal. The fact that any Americans would believe that the Constitution is optional and that we can pick and choose what provisions we want to abide by is ridiculous. Federalist 49, the interests of men must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. That means our political decision making must be in alignment with the constitutional compass, not your own religious compass, because that's not supreme to the constitutional supremacy. Federalist 49, it is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustice of the other part. Now, what's the injustice? At the minimum, that is the constitutional protections. This is why we have not pure democracy, because they position that Americans would be too passionate to actually align with a constitutional mandate. The reality is that they never told us that we should be voting based on our constitutional compass and not our own personal compass. So I blame the government. I blame our historic educational ethics, which has been insufficient in creating us as guardians to guard this constitution because we never knew we had a role in that. Federalist 10, when a majority is included in a faction, republicanism enables it to sacrifice through its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. And that is why we have provisions in the Constitution. The fact that our judiciary, the fact that our legislative didn't actually safeguard against an insurrection didn't mean that us as Americans didn't have an obedience to actually satisfy that provision. The fact that we didn't mean that there's Americans who voted against the Constitution. And even if you voted primarily for religious extremism, that goes against and is incompatible with American constitutionalism because we do not vote based on religious extremism here in the United States because that is not in our values and our provisions. People want to talk about the Declaration of Independence because there's a lot of kind of religious undertones there, but that is 1776. The one that is binding is 1789, the United States Constitution. Now, we talked about how the judiciary and the legislative failed, so Federalist 33. If the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority and make a tyrannical use of its powers, the people whose creature it is must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measures to redress the injury alone done to the Constitution as the urgency makes just good judgment justify. Now, when it comes to we the people, the only thing we could have done is not vote for the one who is disqualified because he attacked the Constitution. The fact that over 75 million voted against our country doesn't change the reality that voting for your religion above that of constitutional supremacy means that you betrayed the country. Federalist 33, if individuals enter into a state of society, the laws of that society must be the supreme regulator of their conduct. Now, I didn't write this. This was our founding fathers, all right? These were like white men. Don't believe me? What happens if we do not abide by that constitutional order? What happens is that without this, all the reservations of particular rights or privileges would amount to nothing. And here's what we have to understand. Anything multiplied by 0 is still 0. Anything contrary to the Constitution does not win unless we amend the Constitution. The Constitution can't change the law. Law cannot change Constitution. Only Article 5 can change the Constitution. Federalist 78 in regard to the interfering acts of a superior and subordinate authority, so constitution versus statutes or law of an original interrogative power, the nature and reason of the thing indicate the converse of the rule as proper to follow. So this is the calculations. They teach us that the prior act of a superior ought to be preferred to the subsequent act of an inferior and subordinate authority, and that accordingly, whenever a particular law contravenes the Constitution, it will be the duty of the courts to adhere to the Constitution and disregard the law. So the reality with Amendment 14, Section 3 is that we had a Chief Justice once upon a time who said that we couldn't have it self-executing because that would be discrimination against the South, right? Because Confederates wouldn't be capable of going into government, blah, blah, blah. But that is opinion that is in itself a judicial decision that wasn't actual through the textualism of the Constitution. That means that it went against the Constitution. And as you see within our guidance of the Constitution, so Federalist 78 through 83 are what guide the Congress in actually designing the courts, because the courts are incomplete under Article 3. So negating that any of this has any weight would negate that the courts have any of the authority that it has. So what this tells us is that our compass when it comes to voting should be the Constitution and nothing else. If your religious consideration when you're voting is contrary to the Constitution, then it means that you should first prioritize the constitutional protections and not your religious interpretations. That is extremism. That is jihadi. We, the people, should be abiding by the Constitution as much as the government is expected to abide by the Constitution. And I'm not sure why that's not something that we can acknowledge, because it literally says it here. But just recognize, relearn, unlearn, because we should be voting based on our constitutional compass, not your own personal opinion of what our government should be. Because if we did that, then we would be all positioning extremist versions of what we want to see, and that's what MAGA is, an extremist version that isn't founded within the Constitution, but it's founded within before. That is the Articles of Confederation. Reduce government spending, weaker federal government, much stronger state government, and no taxation to little taxation. That is the Articles of Confederation. That's what they want to restore, right? So what that means is they are inherently anti-Constitution. But here's the thing, the United States of America only exists as a union because of the Constitution. So if you are anti-Constitution, you are anti-America.